You could say it all started many years ago when I was a young kid. In the winter months, as the snow transformed the world into a white, fluffy wonderland, we would often take snowmobiles to our family cabin. The love of the snow and exploring the outdoors blossomed within me, and I began to dream of what could be. Of course, as a kid, you think anything is possible, and this blissful time was no exception. One dream that often pulled at my mind was to have a remote control version of the snowmobiles I so enjoyed. I searched far and wide, but could not find anything to satisfy my dream. Flash forward now 25 plus years, and that childhood dream still grabs me each year as the snow begins to fall. Once again, I begin a search to find a remote-controlled snowmobile that can bring that same joy I felt as a child. Now in my search, I do not come up completely empty. However, I am still not satisfied with the options available or the price they demand. Having gained some skills over the years and enjoying the freedom to create that 3D printing has brought, I decide to look at new alternatives. Turning to 3D printing, my first thought is that someone out there must have already had this dream too. I began to search for snowmobiles that others had designed for 3D printing. There wasn't a lot to find, but I did find some. I found one on Thingiverse that had been shared free of charge. The files didn't look incredible, but who was I to be choosy? It had some suspension, a one-piece flexible printed track, and was designed for RC. So I printed all of the parts and began to assemble. It quickly became apparent that I was wasting my time. This would not satisfy my dream, so I tossed the parts into a box and moved on. Continuing my search, I next found videos on YouTube of an RC snowmobile that had a unique look to it but seemed to perform very well. The 3PS-4. Thinking I had found what I was looking for, I sent out multiple messages to the designer to see if I could get the files to print my own. Many months went by with multiple messages going unanswered. It was at this time that I decided I could not wait any longer. I would have to design one myself. Having many years of experience using Blender for 3D design work, this is the program I chose to use in my endeavor. My first task, choosing the best size. Wanting to make the design easy to build and the parts needed easy to find, I chose to build around a standard 540 sized RC motor. This gave me a scale size of around 1/6 to 1/7 scale, providing enough room for electronics without the final build being too bulky or heavy. With the size decided, I then had to continually be sure my parts could fit on the common 3D printer. There are 3D printers that can print very large, but my printer wasn't one of them, and I wanted many people to be able to print it, not just those that had a huge printer. Often I would need to tweak or change a design so that it would fit the smaller print area. The most obvious part is the tunnel, it being cut in half lengthwise so that it could fit. I chose to build the frame and suspension first, allowing for testing without needing the body and all other details finished. This also gave another advantage of allowing the frame to be used later for multiple body styles. The first version of the frame was fairly simple. I studied pictures online of real snowmobiles to understand how the skid geometry was to work. I spent hours looking at pictures, tweaking my design, then looking at more pictures. It was exciting and daunting at the same time. I designed the motor mount to be part of the front frame section, with slots to allow for adjusting the mesh of the gears. My original idea was to have a pinion gear on the motor and a much larger spur gear on the sprocket shaft that spun the track. This later proved to be bulky and not very strong. For a first try, it was exciting when I finally got the track to run. It was around this time when I discovered another 3D printed snowmobile on YouTube. This time it was the G4 by RC Creations. I was amazed by the performance and design of the sled. Reading every comment from every video, I quickly learned that he was not interested in selling his files. This was of course disappointing to me, but I had a partially working design, so I pressed on. Now, having a great example that what I was trying to do was possible, I continued on with much more optimism. Back to the transmission. My original 2-gear design worked poorly, so it was time for a redesign. Next, I tried to add a gear between the pinion and sprocket shaft. This worked slightly better and allowed me to move the motor farther from the track, but it still could not hold up well to much use. I needed to reduce the gears much more than I was able to. My next design used a pinion gear that then turned a step gear, which turned a large gear on the sprocket shaft. This was the most promising yet, and I was finally able to drive the sled across the floor. My skid design was working, though something seemed a little off. My track would become loose when no weight was on the machine, but then too tight at full compression, so I turned back to videos and pictures online. I finally discovered that though my geometry matched what I could see in pictures, I had a rigid mount in a location that should actually pivot. I jumped back into Blender and made the necessary changes, then quickly got new parts printing. Much to my joy, the skid suspension worked a lot better. It would go through many more changes, but from this point the design was good. I just needed to get the lengths of everything more precise. With what seemed to be a working transmission, suspension, and steering, it was now time to test the snowmobile in the snow. With a few inches on the nearby mountains, we decided to go for a drive and see how things worked. The trip was educational, but triumphant is not how I felt. The sled was able to drive across the snow, but as soon as it hit anything soft, it would sink and get stuck. The more throttle I would give to get going would only cause my gears to slip. I got in maybe 10 minutes of driving before the gears had melted into unrecognizable blobs of plastic. Needless to say, I was discouraged. At such a low point in my design, I decided to reach out to RC Creations and see if there was any way he would be willing to sell me his files. He was great to talk to, and we had a nice conversation. But of course, his answer was no. He did not wish to share his files. This was understandable, but disappointing. He was helpful for my design and did give me pointers and suggestions. This proved to be a much better answer than just giving me the files anyway. I've learned so much that could have been missed had I been given the easy way out. On thinking of how well RC Creations' sled worked, I decided to search all of his videos to see if I could discover how his transmission worked. I did not want to copy his work, only if I could find something to get me on the right track, I could salvage what I had been working on. Finally, in one of his old videos, I found footage of a transmission he had made. He used a Traxxas gear that then connected to 3D printed gears. This was a new idea to me. Up to this point, I had been printing every gear I used. Going back to Blender, I began designing a new transmission. This also now required changing the front frame so the motor mounted to a transmission plate instead of the frame itself. My first redesign looked terribly similar to RC Creations, but it worked so much better than my previous ones. I would later redesign to make the parts stronger and eliminate the look of it being a copy. I also discovered the use of herringbone gears. In using a herringbone gear, you greatly limit the chance of the gears slipping off from one another. Once again, the sled was ready for testing. Sadly now, the snow had all melted and we were approaching summer. I could not wait until the snow came again. Testing would need to be done on the grass. With a couple charged batteries, we ventured to the backyard. The sled is still only a frame at this point, so the battery gets attached with rubber bands. Starting off gently, I see if it can just casually drive around the yard. Slowly it moves across the grass, the skis sliding smoothly across the blades. The track digs in deeply and there is plenty of traction. Next, I try with a little more speed. The sled moves nicely. I quickly learn that the skis lose their ability to turn at high speed. Rather, they just continue to slide atop the grass. Feeling confident now, I decide to give it a jolt of power. The track grabs the lawn and the skis begin to raise. Traveling many feet without the skis on the ground, I am now overjoyed with how it is performing. I do run after run from one end of the yard to the other. Apart from not being able to turn on the grass going fast, everything is working great. I do a few more passes and then notice the motor is starting to struggle. Taking a closer look, I see that the printed gears have started to melt into one another. Everything else is looking good, so I decide to print some new gears, and this time I will add grease to help with the friction. With new gears and grease, everything seems to work great. Now that I think the main frame and transmission are complete, I begin to design the body panels to make this look like a real snowmobile. Back to Blender I go, pulling in as many reference pictures as I can find. I decided to model the body after the Ski-Doo Freeride. I like the look of low poly design, so I wanted to make a freeride, but keep a low poly look to it to help show that this is a 3D designed and printed machine. Wanting the design to be easy to print, I spent a lot of time trying to eliminate the need for supports. I also wanted the sled to be printable by as many people as wanted, so I made sure all of my parts could fit on a 200mm by 200mm build area. I would design a part, print, test fit, and then tweak the design as needed. The process took months, but slowly and surely, I was getting closer to my childhood dream. Finally, the sled was complete. Now it was just the agony of waiting for the snow to fall again so I can fully experience my dream come true. With my excitement, I also decided to share what I had built through YouTube. Quickly, there was interest, with many people asking if they could have the files. Of course, I wanted to share them, but couldn't feel right sharing them without properly testing in the snow first. People were eager to get their hands on them. Snow began to fall, only a little, but enough to go and try. I loaded up the sleds. At this point, I had built 2, and we headed for the hills. There was only a couple of inches on the ground, but I couldn't wait any longer. With full charged batteries, we set everything up for the first test. Right from the start, I felt like I had finally reached my dream. The sleds were performing great, and I could even turn at high speeds now that the skis were in snow. We ran them until the batteries died. I did break the front A-arms of one sled when I crashed it into a big hole, but that was the only failure. I now felt the sled had proved itself enough that I could finally share the files with all those that were so eagerly waiting. Choosing My Mini Factory to sell my files, I uploaded the files and waited for them to go through the approval process. After a few days, the files were ready to be released to the public. I made a video for YouTube to announce their release and created a Discord channel to provide a quick, easy way for anyone to ask me questions or get support. The sled sold quickly, and I nervously awaited to hear feedback. People began joining the Discord channel, and I was answering hundreds of questions a day. If I got busy and didn't look at my phone for an hour or two, I would come back to an overwhelming amount of messages. The first month after release was brutal. I quickly learned that though I felt I had tested all that I could, there was so much more to be learned when there's multiple people with very different driving styles running the sled. Weaknesses were found that I didn't think could be possible. I was grateful for the feedback and designing changes and improvements as fast as I possibly could go. Everyone was understanding and very helpful in this time of learning. I would get many great suggestions on how to solve a problem, and often they were providing solutions that I hadn't even thought of. I was updating the files almost daily, but feedback was great and everyone was loving the design. Thanks to all of the feedback I received, the sled was given many changes and improvements. The transmission was originally mounted on the right side, but I learned that some motors can only spin one direction, so the transmission was moved to the left to accommodate all motor choices. The front knuckles proved to be a weak spot and thus were bulked up. The front frame was changed to allow more room for electronics, and mounting for the servo was improved. The seat was changed to be removable, thus allowing for the battery to fit under the seat. The ski ride community began to grow. With it came great friendships, cool videos and pictures, and a lot of cool mods to change or improve functions of the design. A year later, the Discord channel has over 500 members. There have been multiple Facebook groups dedicated to the ski ride, and ski ride has become a common search on Google. While there is the occasional bully that tries to tear down the ski ride design, most have been very positive and has made this journey all worth it in the end. I have loved seeing everybody's builds, seeing all the pictures and videos. I often receive thank you messages talking about the fun of building the ski ride. Many people have shared how great it has been to have a project they can enjoy with their kids. Ultimately, a project that I started to fulfill a childhood dream has done that and so much more. One of the most common requests was a body that looks like the Polaris RMK. So back to Blender I go. As mentioned before, the frame was complete without a body. This now makes the job of creating a new body for the ski ride easier than it would have been if the body was part of the frame. Though I like the low poly look of the ski ride, it was often mentioned that a more realistic look was desired. So for the new body, I went for detailed and realistic. After spending most of the spring months designing, I had a new body to share. The Polar body panels are a fun appearance change for the ski ride and work with all of the original ski ride parts and most of the mods. So far, the reception of the new body has been very good. Now, as winter is fast approaching, the enthusiasm for the ski ride is building at great speed. I am excited to see what this season has in store. The future is looking great for the ski ride and all those who enjoy it.